Okay, so Revit 2019, when you open it up, this is basically what you're going to see. You may have something slightly different from mine. You might have a couple extra things here under projects or down here. When I installed my Revit, there was an error in installing some of the templates in the kind of family files and libraries and things like that, so I had to manually go in and install that, so it's not showing up here just yet. But so just jumping into things real quick, we're going to start a new project. You'll have a little drop down that has multiple templates there. Mine are based in a couple other little places that I need to kind of look through and find. So if you have template files, the one that you're looking for is, let's see if I go up to templates, US Imperial. So you'll have ones that look like this. I'm going to use the default. That is it's called default here, but it may be called the architectural template. Other people call it the architectural template from time to time. If you want to do commercial, they're all fairly similar. There's not huge differences between them all, but I'm going to run with the default. So I'll hit default, hit OK, and it'll open up the template. And so right now, what we've got is, you can see we're highlighted, we're on level 1. So this is our project browser. It has all of our views that we can get to through here. So level 1, level 2, if I double click on any of these, it'll go to that particular view. As I open these up, so let's say I go to level 2, it'll have tabs up here for each one of those. That is new to Revit 2019. Before, you did not have this running sort of tabulature of the views that you have open. You can still use the Control Tab key to cycle back and forth through those. So if you need a hotkey, rather than coming up here and trying to find them over the course of working through a project, you might have a bunch of tabs open and just cycling back and forth between views. Control Tab works pretty well. So if I go back to my level 1, I'll close level 2 just to keep it kind of clean. So we've got elevations here, we've got ceiling plans, we don't have anything in legends, schedules, or sheets just yet. Families, these are the preloaded. There are some preloaded things that are in here. And then we've also got some groups. So if we've created any groups, they'll be listed there. And if we import any Revit links like structural files or other subcontractors or things, MEP models, those will all be listed there, where you can turn those kind of on and off and go into those separately. So what we're seeing here is our floor plan, and then we have these elevation markers here. If I select the little caret, it'll show this line. So this line is the view plane of this north elevation. So this is signifying to me that from here, looking this direction, that is my north elevation. Same with east, west, and south. One thing to keep in mind that that does come up with new Revit users quite a bit is they will end up with an elevation that looks like a section, and they'll be trying to troubleshoot that for quite a while. And really what's happened is they might have, for instance, let's say I've got my model and I end up with a building that looks something like that. So these are my walls. If I go to this elevation, because this view plane is actually within the model, it's going to cut off this side of my building, and it's going to read as a section. So you just want to make sure that you're working within these 4 carets here. So if for whatever reason your model is bigger than this, you can always grab these and just drag them out to give yourself plenty of space. The default says that there's no limit on the elevation, so this will go on looking, this direction forever. So if this is dragged, way out of view and your model is only this big in the middle, it's not going to make a difference. So as long as you're within the confines of these 4 little carets here, you should be just fine. One thing also to note, if I double click on my scroll wheel, so let's say I'm zoomed in here, and I double click my scroll wheel, it's going to zoom to fit, and it's going to zoom to fit to these carets here. So let's say my model is only about this big, and I'm working on something here, and I want to zoom to fit, and I double click, and it zooms out that far. That can get a little annoying at times, especially when you really wanted it to zoom to fit to something like that. So normally what I will do is, as soon as I open up my template, I will drag these way out of the way, and then I will highlight them, right click, hide in view, and hide category. So those are basically hidden. If I ever want to bring them back up, they're down here. I can hit the little light bulb. It'll show up in red all the stuff that's hidden there. So now, since those are hidden, if I double click my scroll wheel, it zooms to fit on just what I've produced there. So beyond that, things to start getting into kind of how Revit lays itself out here. Before we get into that, one thing to note that new Revit users also often run into is they get into a 3D program for the first time and they feel like they need to model everything in 3D. They want this immaculate model that has every detail modeled out, and that is just a horrible way to go about building a model like this, simply because it's going to get really cumbersome, it's going to be a huge file, and you're not going to use 50% of those 3D details that you've actually created. So when you go into building a model, you need to constantly be thinking about, is this something that I'm actually going to see in 3D? Is it going to speed me up or be beneficial to have it in 3D? Or is this something that I can just sketch in as lines or something like that? If it's something that you're going to tag, you should probably make it a 3D or taggable element. There are two-dimensional taggable elements as well that take up less space and kind of bandwidth in the model than some 3D elements. But if there's a tiny little element that you need a line to demarcate one thing for another, there's no need to necessarily model that in 3D every single time if you're never going to see it. Just use line work to try and make that work. That is also the case a lot of times. Kids that are in school, college students in architecture, interior design, that sort of thing, they want these unbelievably detailed models. You'll waste hours upon hours trying to make your model everything 3D, when most of the time, if you know what you're going to present, don't model everything in 3D, just model the things that you're going to end up presenting that'll show up in 3D views and renderings and things like that. It makes a little bit more of a difference when you're actually going to be doing construction documents as opposed to just a presentation model sort of thing. So knowing what you need to do as you get into the model is always a good idea, and then to be able to just kind of analyze various things as you're going through to determine, is this something that I actually need in 3 dimensions or not? So getting into the general layout here, like I said, here's your project browser, all of the various views and things that we can get here. When we create new views, they will automatically populate here. So if we create a new level, you'll all of a sudden see a level 3. All of these can be renamed. You can just right click on it, click rename. You can delete them. You can duplicate things. Sometimes a great way to work, if you have multiple people working in a file, or if I am the only one in a file and I know I am going to need multiple kind of presentation view, a construction document view, and then maybe a sloppy sort of working view, I will duplicate level 1, and I'll just say like duplicate with detailing, or just duplicate it. It depends on when you're actually duplicating it. If it's right at the very beginning, just duplicating will work just fine. If you have a bunch of line work and like 2-dimensional elements within a view, duplicating with detailing is a good way to go. It'll bring all of those elements over, and then duplicate as a dependent. That basically copies the view, and then anything you do in one view happens kind of in the other. But if I just duplicate a view, I can set up various parameters for each one of them. So I could have multiple level 1s here. One of them might show absolutely everything on it. The next one just doesn't show furniture, it's just like basic floor plan stuff, dimensioned and construction document sort of stuff. Then the third one might be a full-on presentation view with materials shown, furniture in it, all of that sort of stuff. But I can set up those templates within each view. And I also really like having a working view that I can constantly be changing, the scale of it. I can change from to like a wireframe view, so I'm seeing through a bunch of stuff. It's just a really sloppy view, but it allows me to constantly be working on different things without affecting my other two kind of clean plans. So if I ever needed to print something off real quick, I've always got those other two clean plans, and I don't have to worry about my sloppy view being the thing that I'm printing from as well, and having to hurriedly, hide the things that I don't want to see and clean that up real quick. I've always got kind of a default backup there. So up here we've got our properties. Properties, this basically shows whatever you have selected. It shows you all the information pertaining to that under this view, as well as under the edit type option here. So basically the difference between properties and edit type properties, let's say let's put a component out here. So there's a preloaded desk. I'm going to click the desk in here, and if I do not have anything selected at all, the properties are going to show the properties of the view that I'm in. So right now it's showing me floor plan level 1, basically all the properties that go into that. If I select the desk, it's going to say, okay, here's the desk, the furniture, what are the properties of that desk? So within the properties, these elements here are all this desk specific. So let's say I've got this one, and I've got a second desk here. Let's say I have two of them here. So if I have this one selected, I can change things about this desk in this window. I could change it from level 1 to level 2, and now that one will appear in level 2. I can do various things to that single desk. I'm going to move that back to level 1 there. I can, change it from new construction to maybe it's an existing element. I can change whether it's demolished or not. These are all going to affect just this desk, not the other one. If I go into edit type, everything that I do in this edit type properties window, if I change it in here, it's going to affect both of them. So instead of maybe a width of 5 foot, I say 6 foot and then hit apply, it jumps both of them. So both of these are considered a desk, and then the type within that desk family is a 60 by 30. So let's say I undo that, and let's say I change this one from, instead of a 60 by 30, I do a 72 by 36. Now, if I go to the 60 by 30 and change this to a 6 foot desk and hit apply, that does not affect the other one, because that one is not a 60 by 30, it's the 72 by 36. So in the edit type properties window, this affects every single one of the desk 60 by 30s that you have in your entire model. So you have to be a little careful here when you get a big complicated model. You can't just grab something and then change a small thing about it, because it's going to change absolutely everything in the model that has a desk 60 by 30, and that could cause you all sorts of havoc there. Now let's say I have a 60 by 30 desk, and I will make this one a 60 by 30 as well. So let's say I go into the edit type here, and maybe I want this one, it's still a 60 by 30 desk, so it's still a 2'6" by 5 foot, but maybe the height, I want to change the height of this desk, but I do not want to change the height of some other desks here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. So I will duplicate that one, and it's going to say, okay, what's the new name of this? I can't call it a 60 by 30 because I already have one of those. So maybe I call this 60 by 30 tall. And now I'm going to change the height of this from 2'6" to say a 4 foot. I'll say okay. Now if I go to my 3D view, and you can go to view and 3D, default 3D view here. Now I've got these two desks here, and this one has the name 60 by 30 tall, this one has 60 by 30, and I was able to change the properties of this desk. Because I duplicated it, it does not impact the other ones. And because I duplicated this and created it new, I know this is the only one that I've got right now. Granted, if I wanted more of those, I can always come into architecture, component, and then under desk now, I have a 60 by 30 tall, and I can place more of those around if I want to. So whenever you're working with components and things like that, it's something to be aware of. Anything you do here is affecting just that one. Anything you do within edit type is going to affect all of the particular things that you're working with. And that holds true for absolutely everything in Revit. So it could be a desk, it could be a wall, it could be a window, it could be a door. Anytime you're in the edit type properties, this sort of stuff is going to impact all of that element, not just the one you have selected. So just something to keep in mind there. Up here we have our basic ribbon. You've got your file where you can open, new, save, export, print, all of that sort of stuff there. The architecture tab, for the most part, all of these are going to be things that appear or impact three-dimensional views, or multiple views. So if I draw a wall in this view, it's going to show up in level 2, or it's going to show up in my elevations automatically. If I put a door in, that's going to show up in multiple views, windows, multiple views, components, columns, roofs, ceilings, floors, all of that sort of stuff are all things that impact multiple views rather than just level 1. The contrast to that would be the Annotate tab, and that includes all of these things that are things that will only impact level 1. So if I put a dimension string across some walls in level 1, it will only be visible in level 1. I can't go to the 3D view and all of a sudden see my dimension string. Level 2, same thing. Detail lines are things that I can sketch things in level 1 and I won't see them in any other view. There's detail components, those, same deal. Text, all of that sort of stuff are things that are view specific. They are not going to all of a sudden show up in your elevations or your floor plans. Architecture tab is the opposite. Like I said, these are all three-dimensional. You'll see them in multiple views. So structure, this is sort of your structural components, beams, walls, columns, your foundation elements, rebar, all those sort of elements that impact a structural model. Steel, different steel sections. We probably will not get into those too much. There's enough to get into with the architecture tab and annotate and all these other little things here. And then systems, same thing. You're getting into more of the MEP sort of deal. Insert, you can link different Revit files together. Kind of like I said at the beginning, you can, with this tab down here, you can link MEP models, structural models, architecture models all together. There's no sense in having all of that stuff in one model. It would just get really clunky and really hard to kind of manage and deal with. So linking them together is a good way to do it. I've also found that if you have a massive building that you're trying to put together and things start to get a little clunky, you can separate those models into various phases or different portions. So maybe you have a north wing, east wing, central wing, south wing kind of deal, and you can link those all together and then work on them independently. And then when you need them all to come together, you've got a central kind of file that they all kind of come together with. You can link CAD files, markups, you can import decals. So you can link CAD and then you can import CAD. So linking CAD, it'll automatically, if you refresh it, it will reference back to the file, and if anything is changed in the CAD file, it'll update it in your Revit file. If you import it, there's no refreshing it to get any changes that have been made. So that's the difference between those two. GB XML files, those are mostly for your like analyzing and your sort of efficiencies and trying to run energy analysis sort of stuff. You can import images and stuff like that, but then there's also, this is where your default kind of load family kind of thing is, if you want to load something, different component or different items like that. So Annotate tab, we kind of already went over various things that are within this. analyze. This is where you kind of analyze, heating energy analysis, different configurations of building form and shape and that sort of stuff. They're getting better. I don't know that I would use these for your like lead analysis or anything like that. It's great for initial ideas. So maybe you throw a massing in here and you rotate it 10 degrees this way, 10 degrees that way. How does that impact my kind of energy performance of the building? It'll give you a rough idea of whether one configuration is a little bit better than another, but I wouldn't take those numbers as gospel or anything like that. So massing site, so this is where your topo surface, that sort of stuff comes in. You can create a topo surface by a three-dimensional CAD file. So if you have a 3D CAD file or topo of your site, you can import it and just automatically create a topo surface from it. Otherwise, you can create a topo surface just by clicking points and placing it all yourself. Site components, these can be trees and parking lines and various things like that. And then parking components are just what they sound like, parking spaces and then property lines. If you have a topo surface, you can create building pads, split the surface, create subregions and various things like that. Collaborate, this is great for if you have multiple people working on a single file or multiple companies working on a single file. Basically the way this works is you have a central file and then everybody has their own local files. That central file then gets saved back to. If I click on something in my local file, it reverts back to the central file and checks that item out. So if I click on a wall and edit that wall, I now own that wall until I synchronize my model back to the central file. So if somebody else wants to mess with that wall, it'll tell them, sorry, you can't mess with that. Somebody else has that checked out. And once I synchronize back, then they can all of a sudden edit and mess with it, and it'll update on their model the changes that I've made. So you can have large groups of people in the same model working on a bunch of different things all at once to speed up production and that sort of thing. One thing to be very careful about, though, is if somebody makes a mistake on their end. I've seen things like doors being deleted, copies of multiple roofs or elements, they get copied on top of each other. So you might have like 3 of one wall right on top of each other, or 3 roofs on top of each other. If somebody makes that mistake and synchronizes it back to central and it's not caught, everybody now all of a sudden has that within their model. If you can catch it before everybody synchronizes their model back to the central model, you can avoid that pitfall and use whoever's model has not been corrupted by that mistake as the new central model and then go from there. So just something to be aware of if you're working with inexperienced Revit users and stuff like that. You gotta kind of keep your head on the swivel and make sure that somebody is constantly checking the central model to make sure that there's not issues that have been synchronized back to it. View, creating view templates, different filters. Also, you can render in the cloud here. We'll get into rendering stuff later on. Creating 3D views, so like a camera view, you can drop a camera in, so you click and drag, and it'll create a 3-dimensional perspective view. Cutting sections, so you can cut a section through a part of your building, flipping it back and forth if you'd like to. And you'll notice as soon as I made that view, this sections tab populated here in the project browser. So if I drop that down, now section 1, which is this one, pops up. As soon as I delete that, it goes away. So you can do callouts and plan. You can also sketch if it's just a rectangle, or if you want an odd-shaped callout, you can do that as well. Plan views. You can create floor plans this way, so you can create plan regions, floor plans, reflected ceiling plans, all of that sort of stuff there. If you need to create new elevations, you can. Probably a slightly better way of creating a plan view, though, would be within your elevations. So if I go to my south elevation, you'll see I've got level 1 at 0 foot 0, level 2 at 10 foot. A better way to create a floor plan would be under the architecture tab over here is level, and I can kind of dictate where that level comes in at. So you can see I'm creating a level 8 feet off of level 2. So now when I click that in, now I've got a floor plan level 3. I've got ceiling plans automatically in there. It just allows me to control where that level is coming in at. Is level 3 going to be above level 2? Is it going to be something down below level 1? I can then come in, adjust these numbers, the name of it, all of that sort of stuff, and it'll change over here in the project browser as well. So other things in View, you can create drafting views that are strictly like two-dimensional lines. If there's a detail that you just want to sketch out rather than trying to use your 3D model to try to create, you can just create a detail or a drafting view and just sketch using line work. Creating schedules, sheets to put all of your drawings and stuff on, revision clouds, all of that sort of stuff is on here. You can also use excuse me, the View tab to close all inactive. So I'm on the south. If I hit close all inactive, it gets rid of all of the open tabs here other than south. So if your file's ever running a little slow, that's not a bad way to just help speed things up a little bit. Close the inactive views, and it'll kind of reset for you. It also has the user interface where you can create your own keyboard shortcuts. If you go into this file, you can assign various shortcuts for different stuff. I will say there are default keyboard shortcuts. So if you hover over anything, so like place component, you'll see here where it says place component, next to it, it says in parentheses CM. Anything that you see in the parentheses after that that item is the default hotkey. So if I go to level 1 and hit CM, it'll automatically go to desk or place a component there. Whereas window, WN, door, DR, wall, WA. If you don't like those hotkeys, you can go into the View tab under user interface and go into keyboard shortcuts. You can also add different browsers and turn things on and off. Something that happens occasionally up here is this minimize panel. So if I click that, it'll start changing what that ribbon looks like. And if you're not sure if you accidentally hit it and you're not sure how to get it back, that's where you need to start clicking just to get back to where you can see everything. As you get used to more hotkeys and you know what all the things are, having this full ribbon out can be a little cumbersome. So a lot of times I'll have this kind of minimized and just be using hotkeys to kind of work around and get through stuff. Moving on to the Manage tab, this is kind of your overall project management stuff, so dealing with phases and creating different design options, so you can create multiple iterations. Maybe you've got the exterior of the building kind of figured out, but you're trying to figure out interior layouts. You can do multiple options and be able to cycle through those over and over to show a client or show a project team some different options, and then you can accept one of those, and that becomes the integrated part of the model. You can set the exact location for your project, so you can type in an exact address. You can do it by a default city list. All of that just kind of works for rendering purposes and various stuff like that for getting sunlight and daylight and all that sort of stuff right. Additional settings, so these are your project settings for creating new fill patterns, line weights, line styles, all of that sort of stuff are all kind of built in here that you can edit and change and manipulate however you wish. All of this sort of section are, purging unused. It's great for when you get a pretty big file. You can purge unused, and anything that is not being used in the model will go away. So let's say, for a good example, the desk that we had, let's say I've got the 60 by 30 tall and the 60 by 30 in my model. If I purge unused, the 72 by 36 and 60 by 30 student will both go away. They're not taking up a lot of room in here, but they are in the model. So little things like that can start to take up a little bit of space. Especially things like all of these trees. The odds that you're using every single one of these trees, not great, but they come in as default. So when you purge it, you can purge out all of the sort of stuff that you've got there that you're not using. You can also input project information. So this is the kind of stuff that can show up on sheets automatically. So if you've got you can create sheets that reference this stuff, so that way when you're dragging things onto a sheet, it automatically populates all this, and you only have to enter it one time. You've also got snaps, so you can turn what snaps and things you want on and off. The materials tab, so this opens up your material editor where you can create new materials, edit existing ones. All of that sort of stuff can all be adapted and changed in this editor. That way you can get the look that you're after. Moving on, add-ins. These are just like it sounds, plugins, various things that tools that you can get for Revit. There are quite a few out there. I probably will not get into. I don't use a ton of them, but there are some handy ones out there. But you can search and find those on your own. And then modify is basically manipulating the 3D or two-dimensional elements that you have in your model. These are your copy, your move, your offset, rotate, trim, mirror commands, all of that sort of stuff. Joining geometry, adding, splitting items. So if you've got a wall and you just want to split into two elements so that you can manipulate them separately. Doing arrays, all of those sorts of things are under your modify tab there. What you will also find is that you always have these kind of up here, but if you have an element and you've got an element selected, you'll see that it defaults to a modify, and then it modifies walls. So if I have a wall selected, it's going to tell me, okay, this is the modify tool specifically for walls. So what are all the things that can manipulate walls here? And you'll get a couple additional kind of item specific modify tools. So I can create an opening in the wall, I can edit the profile of that wall, I can attach that wall to the top and bottom, those sorts of things. But if I have a door, those are going to be different sort of tools. So that modify tab does change slightly depending on whether you have something selected or not, and it's going to give you some item specific modification items to go with. So that is a basic run through of kind of the interface and kind of getting into different things. You'll also see it might be just above my screen capture here, but there you probably have a ribbon just above this that has the R, the open, save file, undo, redo, print. All of those sorts of things are usually laid out just above this. There are some hotkeys up here. Well, not necessarily hotkeys, but quick things that people use all the time. So there's a little house. That's your default 3D view. You can select that. You can create sections and then thin lines. So as you use various tools and stuff, like there's some hotkey stuff that'll populate up here that you can use to kind of get to different stuff without manipulating the ribbon over and over again. So rather than going from the architecture tab to the view tab to find my 3D view, or maybe I don't want to come down here to my default 3D view here, I can just select the little house that's up here above. So that's a general user interface overlook at Revit 2019. Where I'm going to be getting into different, I'm going to break down like walls and windows and doors and components and stuff into smaller chunks rather than trying to do it all at once and getting an hour-long video. Hopefully each one of them will be like a 5 to 10 minute little blurb on various parts of walls, so that way if you ever have questions on those, you can watch a short video as opposed to a much longer one. So hopefully this is beneficial, and we'll get into 2019.